How long have you been growing that for?
Hey,
Right.
Frank. It's awesome to see you, my good friends. Just for the people who don't know, this is Frank Harkin. He is someone I've known for, I think we worked out well over 20 years probably now. Currently with LHH, working in that transition and external consulting space. So I thought today, Frank, if you are happy, I just want to talk about transition. There's a lot of nervous people, working. There's a lot of obviously very worried people not working, or people who might just be unsettled or uncertain. So, yeah, just kicking straight into it.
Sure.
I think transition services might be new to people. They might hear about them. They might be known as outplacement services. But can you just give us a taste of, what is it that the market offers? What could people expect? What kind of things should people, if they went to a LHH, what's available to people, organisations or individuals?
Sure. I think the first thing to say is there's probably quite a range of services, and some people will probably have a perception of career transition or outplacement services that might date from the 90s or early 2000s. We've obviously been in a fairly buoyant employment market for quite some time. It's only last year that we were still talking about a war for talent. So to have this uncertainty around employment at the moment and the potential job losses is definitely making people nervous, and there is that sort of uncertainty around what services might be out there. And I suppose I'm probably best to talk about what LHH or Lee Hecht Harrison offer. We offer what might be seen as the usual kind of component in the sense of a consultant, or you might call them a career coach, someone who supports and directs your journey through, as we call it, active placement. Those services which are, the outcome is to try and find your next job, or to help you build your career, or to make some decisions, for people that might actually be, as many people I've spoken to are just reappraising their lives. Often, I suppose, and that might be because I'm in my mid-50s, I'm talking to other people in their mid-50s who are sort of stepping back and looking back at their office job and wondering, well, actually, is there something else? And so part of the offering that LHH has is actually exploring career options, exploring even concepts like active retirement. So the difference, I think, from Lee Hecht Harrison's point of view is how much of the journey is enabled through technology. So there's a number of portals that can be utilised by the individual so that they can pace their own sort of journey through the outplacement offering. We call it the Career Resource Network, and that has resume templates. It has access to our digital talent exchange. It does have some access to recruitment in a broad sense, but it's meant to be a resource that challenges people to think about what their real sort of values are, what their life goals are, to try and understand, what do I do next? Am I looking for a similar job in a similar field, or am I doing something totally different? And so that sort of level of tech enablement is probably something that helps to set Lee Hecht Harrison apart. It's part of the unique selling proposition, is what we can do alongside human-to-human coaching, which in some cases is still done virtually, just as we're doing through a Zoom call, or it can be done face-to-face in an office or over a coffee.
Yeah.
So that's probably a very sort of boiled down sort of description of those services.
Isn't it funny, just listening to you, Frank, sorry to cut in, where, I think, and again, not even traditionally, I'm going to say up to even today, I think people think about, I lose my job, I get another job. you know, and that's the option. It's kind of like one, you know, have a job, need a job, so I've got to go do that. The more time I've spent in recruitment, the more I've learned, I think, or certainly tried to get people to talk to your point there, which is if we can lift it from job and take it to, and this is highest level, purpose. You know, what is your purpose? What do you want to achieve? What are your values? And then, funny enough, job comes so far down the process of transition that it's quite scary for people. But, you know, I'd love, I don't know if you can talk to that a little bit about, you know, at the highest level or at the starting point, where should people be starting their thinking if it's not job to job?
Yeah, and I think you're spot on in the sense of wanting to understand what is my purpose, where do I demonstrate some value, where do I create some value, grab some value in the sense of the work that I'm doing that aligns better with my own purpose. And so yes, it's a conversation. It's reappraising my values, and I suppose people often feel that their values are relatively fixed, but I think over time people will find that their values can shift a little, and so it's good to take that time, utilize the sort of resources that are available to understand through some assessment where do my values sit at the moment. In the sense of my talents and skills, if I've been in a job for 15 or 20 years, I'm probably going to need to do some reskilling and upskilling. And again, that's what's provided through, you know, LHH, through some of the portals. We also, of course, assist organisations to redeploy. One of the sort of repackaging almost of the career transition services that we're doing at the moment is to bring the focus back onto a return on individuals. And you will know yourself that there's a cost to letting someone go, potentially replacing them in an organisation with that person that you need that has a new set of skills for the challenges for the organisation going forward. But what if you actually invest in the individual in such a way that you can redeploy them back into your business and potentially reskill them rather than make them redundant? And that's an interesting sort of position, I suppose, to take, is to suggest to organisations, well, have you exhausted redeployment before you go to, we need to let some people go? And I suppose what we've seen thus far is not maybe as much redundancy, thankfully, as, I mean, Wellington's a different town because it's a government centre, but we haven't, I don't think, seen the wave of unemployment yet, perhaps, that maybe many people were expecting. And in talking to some people, that's what they've done. They've successfully redeployed. In some cases, it's so it's in the banking or in insurance. They've successfully redeployed travel consultants or travel insurance consultants and redeployed them into their wider business rather than making them redundant. And tried to take a bit of more of a long-term view around what we may need in our industry or in our organisation over the next 2 or 3 years. The other side I've sort of seen, I suppose, is organisations being very quick, very decisive, and saying, right, we let you go. And there'll be obviously disappointment for people. And through career transition or active placement services, as we call them, many of those people who were let go early in the COVID-19 are actually now re-employed already. It hasn't taken them long to take the skills that they have and basically find work somewhere else. It may not have been the job that they wanted, but they are back in employment. And organisations, I suppose, that were quick, made that decision early, have done their and provided some services around that decision, have actually done their employees, their past employees, a good service in being able to provide that for them. My concern probably now is that with two tranches of the wage subsidy. There have been organisations that have been fearful of making decisions, hadn't really perhaps seen some changes in the economy that we were starting to see late last year. They haven't taken advantage of the opportunity that a crisis provides, and they haven't been decisive, and they may find that they're letting people go as unemployment really does start to rise. And it's at that point that those people are really going to need some good support, some good services around them in that career transition space.
Yeah.
Because there will be more people looking for work. It will be more competitive.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because very quickly we think about career transition, and I just listening to your language, and I know I do the same thing. We think about organizations rather than individuals. And, you know, one of the big things I'm trying to refocus on is, you know, every individual is an individual. It's really straightforward statement.
Yeah.
And you and I have had a conversation like this previously about these big generalizations of groups. But, you know, thinking about, I wrote a quick comment to LinkedIn around workforce management, or workforce, understanding your workforce and the future requirements of your workforce. And, you know, the scary reality is I don't know many organizations, and this is a challenge to organizations. I don't know many organizations that have got a workforce strategy that can look ahead, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. And people might start listening to this going, oh, Troy, why going on about organization? Because, you know, I don't think you need to be the organization. I do believe if I'm coaching a candidate, you need to take a 1, 2, 3 year. If you are the workforce, you just happen to be your own workforce. And I'm sure you'd agree that you need to take a workforce strategy with yourself that actually takes 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, because you're going to need to build up a different set of skills, a different level of understanding, a different lots of connections, even if you stay within the same industry. So I say that to you going, what's your belief around individual responsibility? And that sounds kind of heavy, but I go, there is a lot of, I'm in that mindset today. I'm in a really good mindset where I go, you know, the world's yours to take. But, you know, I want people to believe that, I suppose, Frank.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Troy. I think what you're really talking about is a career for life rather than a job for life. And deciding that actually my career might have many aspects to it, but I have a plan. I know where I'm sort of heading. You know, there's an old saying, I suppose, if you don't make decisions for yourself, someone will make them for you. And many people will attest to the fact, I know myself, my first job, it kind of almost chose me rather than me choosing it. And in a sense, it was useful. There were some great learnings from being a foreign exchange dealer, but it wasn't really meant to be my career. And so I think there's always that risk that in these times when people are concerned about mortgages, paying school fees, putting bread on the table, they jump at a job that is maybe close to like. They don't really take into consideration their long-term career aspirations. And the responsibility, I think, is increasingly starting to sit more evenly between the individual and the organisation as to your career development. And, you know, good organisations obviously will help individuals identify that, hey, you need to do some work on understanding where your talents lie, where you may need to upskill, reskill. Certainly in that sort of, it's interesting, I mean, that workforce management space is one where there seemed to be a little bit of demand pre-Christmas for people with that expertise, but they're in reasonably short supply.
Yep.
So there's a gap there that could be filled by people deciding, well, actually, I've done analysis, now I need to move into understanding workforce requirements. How do I upskill into that space? Because that will be an ongoing career for as long as we have individuals in the workplace and organisations employing them. there will be more demand for that. And you're right, it's probably, can we think 2 to 3, maybe 5 years ahead? I think in some of my past sort of roles, I've seen people be able to think 18 months ahead as to the skills they need, probably aligned with new technology coming into the market or coming into their workplace. But that truly strategic viewpoint of 5 years or more is probably one that's not commonly available. So that's a niche in itself, but it's more about taking greater responsibility for your own career.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think I've done a wee bit of work with transition, and you know, as I talk to it, I kind of think about where do people get the moments to have these conversations, because they go, I don't have time to think about that, Troy, and there's no real structure to have that, Troy. And then I go, gee, but most organisations, and I say most, I know it's not all, guess what, you are having a one-on-one conversation with your manager, possibly weekly, possibly monthly, possibly quarterly, but hopefully definitely annually. And part of me, you know, just wants to believe that, you know, that is your opportunity, you know, to do your homework, again, guide your own future. I'm with you. I just really believe that, you know, if you take those one-on-ones seriously, even if your manager or the person, you know, isn't that competent, which I know is, you know, very probable, you know, you can still spend the time going, well, this is a good structure to think, you know, what do I want to do next year? What were my achievements this year? You know, what was I really good at? If I could do some courses next year, what would they be? And geez, what if the organisation would pay for it? How much better would that be? So, you know, sometimes I think people miss some obvious moments.
Yes. And what you're talking to there, I suppose, is the coaching conversation. And I suppose over the last maybe 10 years, maybe slightly longer, there's been more of a focus on developing managers who can have those coaching conversations. And that includes career development as part of that conversation, performance conversation. But in many cases, managers will still struggle to have the conversation from their side. Some employees obviously may also struggle because they are comfortable where they are and don't want things to change. Most conversations obviously are about change. You're either going to change your performance by improving it, you're going to change your direction as to what you're looking to do with your career and what interests you. You're going to be drawn towards some new technologies, some new learning opportunities, but they all represent a degree of change. And just as we might look at organisations as, you know, as Lee Hecht Harrison do, in the sense of accelerating change and readiness for change, many people are not ready for change. I mean, it's probably fair to say that most of us are looking for stability rather than constant change, and yet all I've heard in the last 5 to 10 years is that the new constant is change. And I think most people will acknowledge that that's happening. The pace of it just seems to be accelerating all the time.
Yeah.
So the challenge, therefore, is as individuals, as managers, as organizations, is can we adopt a philosophy, adopt a mindset, a frame of thinking that allows us to keep changing and see that that's a positive, and that there'll be some missteps as well. It's not going to be perfectly linear. It may well be a little bit haphazard. It might be all over the place at times. But we review our change and may come back to it and say, actually, we need to change again. And that's possibly a little bit of a variation for many people. They would prefer that it wasn't like that.
Yep.
They prefer a more stable environment. It's interesting, isn't it, in the sense of how adaptable people have become around working from home. You know, I've not heard many disaster stories of organisations being unable to set their staff up to work from home. Now, of course, we see, particularly here in Wellington, almost a directive to get people back into the CBD, back into the offices, back into those government departments. So it's another change, and we're adapting maybe a little bit back to what it was like. But we're also hearing stories of people working reduced hours, working 1 or 2 days from home, having to adapt to those different environments in a shorter time cycle. Over 5 days, I might have 3 different working environments.
Well, that was, and I don't know if you listened to that, but we spoke to Gaynor, and, one of the things I took from that conversation, and it actually, really lifted me, is that, here I am, I was sitting there going, woe are people who are sitting there worried, or woe are people who are at risk. And I still believe part of that. But what Gaynor said is exactly to that point. Don't underestimate how resilient people are, how good people are at adapting, and how many people will adapt in a way that, leads to opportunity for them. And I don't mean opportunity in taking advantage of any situation, but, and I went, actually, that's very true. I look at our organisation here, I go, broadly, we've adapted, in my opinion, very well. Without, not perfection, but we've adapted very well. And where we have seen struggle, good old human nature takes over, and you look to help people and provide them some support. And that's, for my part, I think that's being a good leader, that's being a good employer, that's your obligation. And it doesn't even feel like an obligation, it just feels like life to me. One of the things I wonder if people get nervous, and I think at some point, because it's we talked a little bit about millennials, and I don't like big general terms, but interestingly, people hear the word career, I think, Frank, and they get nervous that it means trajectory up. And one of the things you and I will know, and certainly what I'm learning as I age, is that actually career is what you want it to be, and therefore you don't have to be pressured by trajectory. You have to keep looking for what you enjoy, where you're happy and what you're good at, and just picking up on your point, and I'll be interested just adding to that, the 2 things that were told to me about this next generation, and that's not of people, but just of us, you need to be learn somehow, get adapting skills or the ability to manage change, and then continual learning. So, if you can be a continuous learner, and then you've got some adaptability. And now I think about adaptability, I go, geez, maybe we've innately got that, to some degree. Maybe some people don't. Like everything, nothing's 100%. But, what would you say, if someone came to you and said, look, I haven't done any learning in the last 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, what's your first piece of advice to them now?
Well, that's a really good question. It may well be that they have put themselves second for a period of time, and what I mean by that is they have, and I would see people in this situation when I was doing leadership development for them, coaching, where they could find plenty of reasons why they had stepped away from their own learning. It would be things like, the typical one, raising a small family, a young family, putting time into young children, elderly parents. It's often stuff outside of work too, to some extent. But also, you might talk to them and discover, well, actually there are opportunities, but I don't take them up. I find reasons or excuses to utilize my time in other ways, and it's an easy habit to get out of too. I think possibly for some people it's give me a level of learning, attainment, a qualification, experience, and I can build a career on that, and I don't need to keep learning. It's probably adaptability is one word that probably links to learning in this way. The other one is curiosity. Whether someone is just genuinely curious, if they are looking at the world in such a way that they want to ask questions, they want to understand some emerging trends, they read widely, they are informing themselves and can see, actually, this is an area where there are changes happening. I need to understand them better, and I need to upskill myself so that when I'm conversing with other people, I can add to that conversation. I can understand what what is happening, and maybe I genuinely go out and sign up for a course and do some learning in that space. It may well be only at a sort of introductory level. It may be only sort of at a beginner level, but you might decide, actually, I really enjoy this. This is the area I want to head to. And so I suddenly, dare I say that terrible word that everyone's using at the moment, I pivot and I go from being a banker to being an IT guru.
Yeah.
And then maybe at some other point I pivot to something else. And adaptability, I think, is innate. If you think about the human race, we've had to evolve over a millennia, I suppose, but we also quite like feeling stable and safe. The idea is to think about that state of change as being safer. If I stay where I am, I'm not moving forward at all, then I'm not safe. I'm getting left behind, and so I need to keep moving forward. And that's just a concept that obviously we can all move forward at our own pace, again, the individual, but yes, we need to move forward. And so not having done any learning for 5 or 6 years, it could actually be really, really refreshing for someone to suddenly just start learning something. It may not be what they ultimately end up sort of moving towards, but it's a process of, actually, I need to start. And so if I start on this and I don't like it, but then I go and find something else to keep learning on, then that is part of a process of actually becoming a little bit more resilient.
Yeah, it's funny, just as you said the word learning, it's interesting. I had this initial thought back, and I just wonder whether other people do. They think about personal development and learning, and if they have a flashback because they haven't done some learning for a while of school, they might go, oh, it's school, it's university, it's highly structured, it's highly textbook driven, and then, but interestingly, immediately you went to learning can happen in many ways. You just pick up a book, that is in itself learning, and if you can pick up a book, that is the start of something. And it's funny, how many small things you meet people who coach or guide, or I've got people who coach and guide me in different parts, and it's amazing, the small bits. They'll go, well, have you read this? And all of a sudden they'll throw a book to you, and then that feeds something, to go do something else. So I can't say I've done a whole lot of let's call university-based learning in my last 10 years, but I have done a lot more learning and connecting and conferencing and taking responsibility for that, and it's been hugely positive for me, even right down to the point where I think, and I say this more for people out there, people really want to help you, and they really want to help you, and they're free. I think a lot of people think having a mentor or a coach or an advisor or a trusted someone is really complex. I don't believe that's the case, because you just have to ask the question. If I said, hey, Frank, and I've done this in the past, Frank, can I borrow you for 1 hour? I've just got a couple of things on my mind, and you go, absolutely, Troy. And it's free.
And 3 hours later, we're still talking 3 hours later.
You're listening anyway.
But yes, and the use of the use of a coach and it opens up a good discussion around, say, the difference between coaching and mentoring. Coaching tends to have a purpose, and it's very time delineated. We should be looking to achieve an outcome for a coachee within, let's say, 6 months. It's not a long-term relationship. Whereas a mentor, of course, can be someone who you might keep touching base with regularly for a number of years. On that point, I'm always surprised how often people select mentors who are very much like themselves. And I think the best mentors tend to be ones who have strengths in other areas, who think and see the world differently and challenge people to look at the world differently, rather than, yes, I agree, this is how I did it, just follow the way I did it. We've probably talked a little bit about generational differences, but I think situations change, and the learnings from one time period are probably useful to that time period.
Yes.
The learnings that we're picking up now are useful for this time period and the preceding time period, the future time period. How someone did accounting in the 1980s is not of use to a young accountant today.
Mm.
So a mentor who's just, I suppose, relating their experiences from many, many years ago is probably not as helpful as someone who's able to help in the current climate and how things are done right at the moment. So it's sort of a distinction that I like to make for people around, hey, there are some key differences between a coach and a mentor. Yes. And select a mentor who will challenge you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've certainly seen situations where someone is called a mentor, but essentially they're a coffee or a wine, coffee wine company. Where, for me, I think, I've got people I love to do that with, but there's other group where I go, I'm in this environment, and I must say I have and bless his soul, so I've got a coach who helps me with triathlon, and he must just wonder what he's doing with me. But ultimately, I really enjoy that relationship because as long as he understands it's my level I want to get to, not whatever level he wants to get to, then, that relationship works. And that's been good. We've known each other for 5-6 years. And at a business level, it's exactly the same thing. We have an understanding about what I want to achieve, and he challenges, points to that and keeps that growth trajectory. But yeah, it's, I definitely wouldn't want to be mentored by Troy Turner. If I was Troy Turner, two of me in the room's not good. Hey, Frank, just closing off, because I know there will be, it's nervousness about losing your job in transition. So I kind of want to talk to that, but actually I'd rather take a longer term view of it. Frank, if you were sitting in a job today that you just weren't sure, or you're thinking about your future, what are 3, 4, 5 things, I don't know the number, what advice do you give to someone who wishes to make a change, a transition, forced or not? What are some of the things they should start today, regardless of their situation?
Well, I think the first thing is reach out to your networks. Start talking to people about how you're perceiving your situation. That's valuable because in verbalizing it, you're hearing it from yourself, you're relating it to someone else. They too will have their perspective of that situation, and they will potentially ask some good questions of you and challenge you to think about the situation maybe a little bit differently. They might challenge you to think about, well, what can you do? But the key thing is in reaching out to your network is you're making it known that change is potentially happening for you, whether it's, as you say, forced, or whether you're the architect of some of that change for yourself. And by reaching out to your network, you, in a very simplistic sort of way, you do start to uncover some opportunities that may not be on a job site or advertised in some way. You will start to get a sense of how people are seeing, what trends people are seeing that might be important if you're looking to stay like for like, in the sense of moving to another organisation and looking to still do the same job. But the networking is critical. I think there's always that tendency sometimes to get a little bit bogged down in work and in life and feel that our connections are reducing. We're not putting as much time into them. So trying to reach out and reconnect with people, let them know that the change is either happening or is about to happen or has happened. Make them very aware of that. Yes, in basic terms, you would be looking to dig out the old resume and start to think about, what have I achieved in my current role? What learnings have I gathered along the way? Where do my interests lie? If I sort of look at where I've been and where I am now, is that what I want to continue doing? And do I need to look at something totally different? What else could you be doing? You could be sort of meeting the challenge a little bit more head on and actually addressing the change, with a manager. If you're able to have those conversations to get a little bit more certainty, understand what the facts are. I think what's been really interesting is to hear from employees and from managers about the level of transparency that's been going on in a lot of organisations, where they've been very clear about their financial situation with their employees. And that's made it easier to sort of make decisions from the employer's point of view. From the employee's point of view, that then gives them a little bit of knowledge, some facts around, okay, then knowing that and believing that this is the direction the economy's heading in, do I need to move now? It kind of talks to that conversation we were having before about employers making decisions for employees and making them quickly so that they can be re-employed before unemployment levels start to really rise. Does the employee actually go, actually, that applies to me too, I can act? I think the challenge is often the fact that many of us underestimate our skill levels, our talents, because, in a funny sort of way, having been in the market recently myself, it's quite uplifting at times to understand that, yes, I do have talents and skills that there is some demand for. When you've been in a role for a while, you haven't had that reality check. You haven't actually been able to go out to the market and actually assess what is my market value. So be proactive. I mean, one of the things that I've been almost constantly surprised during this period of uncertainty and nervousness is the number of people who have been employed during this time period.
Yes.
There will be, I think, once we see some wage subsidies dropping off, there will be some job losses. But there's also been employment. And although there may well have been a bit of a freeze that happened within the government sector, they are starting to employ again. So I think it's important to operate with facts, get some sound sort of, and this is where, of course, a recruitment consultancy like the one you manage, Direct, has that information. It's important that if this is a situation that you're currently facing, get in touch with a recruitment consultant, have a chat about your industry, other industries that are potentially growing, other industries that are shrinking as well. You don't want a sort of situation where you embark on a career in an industry that's shrinking.
It's funny you say that, because I go, the number of people who worry about the whole market, all of New Zealand's unemployment rate. This is a bit brutal, but at the end of the day, as an individual, you need to worry about the unemployment rate in your location, in your sector, in your organisations of interest, and within your discipline group. So you have to keep boiling it down to, again, what's relevant to you, but you do need the high level stuff, I understand it. But for the amount of people worrying about the total unemployment rate in New Zealand, I think the only person who needs to worry about that are the ministers and the Prime Minister. The rest of us, can isolate our thinking a little bit more. And you might say, well, that's very individualistic behaviour, Troy, but guess what? In relation to employment, you are what you're trying to employ and what you're trying to move forward. So one of the things I certainly try and push people to do is get educated on the information that's relevant for them. So if you're sitting in Taihape and you're going to live in Taihape and you can't travel, guess what? Taihape is your relevant market, and I say that to people. So, keep away from some news that doesn't necessarily become pertinent. But as you dive in, I use the ANZ survey information, and people go, it's a bit analytical, but once you know what you want to do, in what location, and once you know your purpose or what values are important to you, you can start, identifying organisations of interest, and then you can start identifying organisations of interest that are hiring, and go from there. And just picking up on your comment, I do think, to worry is you don't have to. I say that you can control aspects of your recruitment, and you can control a lot more than you perceive. I really believe in exactly what you just said, that trusted advisor network group. And I think, again, if I think about connotations, people go networking means, oh, I'm really going out to tell them I want a job. But that's not what you're saying. I try and encourage people to go, you're going out to listen. So here's an opportunity to learn, where if you went out to someone and said, I know I haven't seen you for a few years, I'm contemplating what my next move might be. I'm really interested in what you do and what your organisation does, because guess what? I haven't bothered to ask in the 2 years I've known you, or the 15 years I've known you. So what do they do? Oh, they sound like a good company. Oh, they're a bad company. That's cool. Thanks for telling me. And that's how employee brands evolve, in my opinion, is through conversation and through reality and fact checks.
Yeah. It is interesting, isn't it? How sometimes I think we have to ask that question 2 or 3 times of each other to fully really understand what each other does sometimes in work. It never ceases to amaze me how often people will say things to me, are you still doing sports psychology? Well, actually haven't been able to do that really since 1999, and only did it for like 6 to 8 months, but for whatever reason, that was what they heard, and that's what they listened. That's what they heard. So yes, it's important, I think, to as you say, to reach out to people and listen to what they actually do tell you. And it's more about listening than telling in those conversations, and just but obviously being really present in the conversation and listening, paraphrasing it back if you have to for clarity, because too often it can sort of be in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, isn't it? It's funny. I think Mental Health Week was last week, and I sit there and go, I think male, female is irrelevant. But if I really try to impress upon people to start having some real conversations. And if you have real conversations with your friends, connections, and people then, the world is your oyster. And we're talking, we're in New Zealand. 2 points of separation could probably get you connected to any organisation and or job if you bother to stop, pause, and have a real conversation and follow, some of those angles. So, it's we're blessed in New Zealand in a lot of ways. I know it's a small market, but that's the blessing at the same time.
Yes, it's better to see that as a blessing rather than a disadvantage. And that yes, more people know each other and will help each other. I think we've demonstrated that through 8 or 9 weeks of lockdown, that people were prepared to help each other.
Yeah.
People buying groceries, standing in queues for people who can't get out to get things. We've seen a lot of helping. Also collaboration. I think moving forward, collaboration will be a very, very sought after behavioural set, and organisations will be looking for people who are not just adaptable but collaborative and prepared to work well in a team, because some of those teams might be partially virtual. We're going to see people, that value around collaboration is going to be very important.
I agree.
So if you can't network,
the sound is just starting to cut up a wee bit at my end. I'm not sure if it's the same at yours, but what I might do is call it a day at this end. And what I'll do for others here, I'm gonna attach the link to your organisation. I'm also just going to try and put hopefully a link to some tools that people might be able to access around, whether it's a career conversation, whether it's looking at their values, but hopefully just to help them with the move. But thank you so much for your time. Have a lovely night tonight.
Well, yes, I hope I do. And I hope everyone else who decides to do some multiple crossings tonight is a less, not too bumpy a ride, so to speak.
I love it. Thank you, my friend. Have a great day.
Thanks, Troy. Thanks very much.
Bye.